everyone. Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Friday, November 3rd, 2023, the first Friday of the month. I'm Christine Niles, here with my two co-hosts, Rodney Pelletier and Alex Carzon. It's come to light recently, a well-known actor and comedian has converted to Catholicism. Rob Schneider is well known for his involvement on Saturday Night Live back in the late 80s through the mid-1990s. He also acted in dozens of movies over the years. Earlier this week, he made a long post thanking people for their birthday wishes as he turned 60 and reflected on his relationships with colleagues and loved ones. His post included this sentence: "Lastly, as I am a new convert to Catholicism, I offer my apology for my lack of Christ's forgiveness to my fellow man." That's very heartwarming news. Another big person in the news lately, a Catholic convert, is Tammy Peterson, who is the wife of course, Jordan Peterson on Daily Wire. And it's actually very interesting. There's an article in Catholic Register that kind of talks about her conversion. She was diagnosed with cancer, and essentially the doctor came out and he said, "You only have 10 months to live." I mean, it was a very aggressive form of cancer. And so she essentially just gave everything over to God, everything. And people were struck by how she just didn't seem that worried about it. And she said, I was just giving everything over to God. She had a Catholic friend named Queenie Yu, who was an adult Catholic convert and a member of Opus Dei, very, very devout. So she gave her some rosary beads that were blessed by Pope Francis. And also it says here that she went to a hospital in Philadelphia for further tests before leaving Toronto. YouTuber Father Eric Nicolai blessed her, shared a novena to St. Jose Maria Escrivá, who's the founder of Opus Dei. On the 5th day of Peterson praying the novena, the same day that she was scheduled for another surgery, doctors discovered that the medical issue had resolved on its own. The surgery was canceled. She was discharged. It says Peterson attributes her miraculous recovery to God, as well as a radical change in her diet. But, she also talks about how praying the rosary during that time was a tremendous help to her. So they asked Jordan Peterson, "What do you think about your wife converting to Catholicism?" He's fully 100% supportive. He said that when they first got engaged, he asked her, "Will you commit fully to seeking the truth no matter what?" And she actually thought about that for a full year before she came back and said, "Yes, our marriage will be completely committed to the truth." And so he said that's what she's doing. She's seeking the truth. So, yeah, it's great.
Wow. Yeah, that's really awesome. You don't hear that too often, I guess, but that's, I guess that's kind of the attitude maybe, with any convert, is the truth is the truth. You want to find it wherever it goes, and it always goes to God because God is the truth. The thing with Rob Schneider is really fascinating. I've been watching him, when I was a kid, watching him on SNL back in the early 90s and everything. Like, they showed the role of the guy at the photocopier there.
Yes.
So funny. I haven't seen that in years.
Back when SNL was funny.
Yeah, back when it was funny. Yeah, was that 30 years ago now or something? But it's cool. It's interesting because he's been a fixture in comedy for decades now. He's friends with Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler has his circle of friends, and if you watch these guys, they all appear in each other's movies. They all have parts of varying, degree and complexity in each other's movies, and so he's been in absolutely everything. Pretty much everybody knows who Rob Schneider is, and he's kind of more recently he's gone from just doing Hollywood stuff. He's on Twitter. He's very active on Twitter. He's been very outspoken, too, in some of his more recent comedy shows against wokeness. He has a show on Fox Nation. And just look at his Twitter feed. And he's been condemning, the forced shots, the encroaching, communism with the Biden. He just said something earlier today, which I can't remember it right now, but it's like, wow, like a guy who's in Hollywood is saying this? Like, how has he not been canceled? Maybe they'll cancel him, I don't know. But it's good to see that he's like you were saying with Jordan Peterson's wife. She's getting closer to the truth, seeking the truth. it's good to see Rob Schneider doing that as well. It's refreshing because obviously Hollywood is known for fantasy and perversion and all sorts of stuff. And Rob Schneider's done, you see the movies he did in the past, they weren't all Lives of the Saints either. But he doesn't pretend that they were either. I mean, everybody's on a journey. So,
yeah, we're seeing this trend, especially among celebrities, where as the left ramps up more and more, especially with canceling people, they start to see this trend of, okay, no, I'm leaning more towards these conservative ideologies. And then eventually, if you follow that through to its logical conclusion, you end up with Catholicism. We see that with somebody like Dave Chappelle, who was really woken up to just, oh my gosh, this is what the left, treats us like when we just hold to these basic things. So Rob Schneider has fully, completed the circle there, so to speak, and come fully home. And I think Jordan Peterson probably will follow. If I had to guess, I've heard him say things on Catholicism like it's the thing that makes, most logical sense. And he's never been extremely critical of Catholicism. I think he just has a harder time wrapping his brain around some of the more intricate theological points. But he very famously went on with Bishop Barron a couple of years ago, and they had like an hours-long discussion about various aspects of the faith. So he's very open to it. And that's something that I always tell people. I'm like, you can't accept something if you're not willing to be open to it. You have to at least have an openness when you approach it, and you're going to be much more willing to think through those points and say, okay, where am I maybe wrong? Where, maybe do I need to accept some things that I've never thought of before?
Right.
Yeah. Another person, you were talking about him being on a journey, another actor on a journey, recent convert, is Shia LaBeouf. I know that people have been critical about him. Obviously, controversial life, but I encourage people to watch. There's an hour-long interview with John Bernthal, a fellow actor, where both of them are extremely honest with each other. And Shia is completely open and honest about what a morally degraded life he led before. And he hit rock bottom. He went through a period where nobody wanted to touch him. His agency dropped him because of these charges of abuse against his ex-girlfriend and things like that. And he acknowledged, some of them were false, some of them were true, but the fact is, he said, it didn't matter because I did some of these horrible things, and I have a lot that I owe other people. I have many apologies that I have to make. But what's interesting is, so he's at rock bottom. He's literally living out of his car in a parking lot, and nobody wants to talk to him. And then he suddenly gets a call out of the blue saying, hey, we want you to be in the Padre Pio film. But you have to train first, meaning you have to go live with some monks in a monastery to learn the life of Padre Pio. And he says, first I lived in the car outside the monastery in the parking lot, but then I eventually moved into the monastery. And he said that it completely changed his life because he'd never been around monks before, Franciscan monks. And he said the first thing that struck him was the joy. He said the laughter. He'd never seen such pure laughter and joy from any people before, but especially didn't expect it from monks because he had this idea they're all very somber, and very all that. And he said they were very real people. They came from backgrounds, like one was from the Marines, another was a former football player, just very real people who enjoyed one another, their company. And so he said slowly spending months with them really transformed his life. And at first, he approached the movie just as an actor, which he'd always done. This is just a part. But he said it started becoming very real to him, to the point where he was afraid to play the character because he thought, there's no way that I can be Padre Pio. I'm terrified of failing. But it was through that whole thing that he actually converted to his Catholic faith. Now, does he have a ways to go? Of course he does. Of course anybody does. I'm not going to sit here in judgment over him. And we should pray for him. But that's just a wonderful thing. That's another recent convert to the Catholic faith.
Yeah, and I think something to discuss too, because we're talking about converting to the Catholic faith. There was a time where a person said when they become Catholic, it's like, oh, okay, I know what that means. Nowadays, there's such a range now of what is Catholic. You have abortion activists who say they're Catholic. They'll even go to Mass on Sundays, maybe even some days of the week, and they're like, I'm still, gay is love, and abortion is woman's right, and all this stuff. It's like, well, you're not functionally Catholic. So I think and not to criticize any of these guys either. I'm just saying there's a range. There's like there's like Mel Gibson on one side with all of his complexities, and then you have, I don't know, people hobnobbing with James Martin all the way on the other side, and that whole range is Catholic. So it's good. It's good that people are converting. But it's like, well, okay, what kind of Catholic? Like, for instance, recently, like within the last year, there was an interview I saw of Bas Rutten. He's an actor, but also a championship fighter and everything like that. And he's been very open about his Catholicism. I think we interviewed him on Mic'd Up, but you could see his brown scapular right, above his neckline or below his neckline here. Kevin James is another one, well known to be Catholic, and like traditionally Catholic even. What's Henry?
David Henry.
David Henry. I was going to say Mark. Yeah, David Henry. Right. Also, he's been in movies recently. They're really, really good. Stuff. Neil McDonough. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but he also is a guy. He's very Catholic, to the point. Like it's funny. Like we were talking before this, he'll play really bad guys, and the situations are violent and all sorts of crazy stuff. But he said he won't kiss a woman on camera who's not his wife. He said, these lips belong to my wife, nobody else. And it's, in Hollywood where people take off their clothes, and even when they say, well, I won't do it for anybody, I'm doing it, because this is a movie, it's art. Well, he even says, well, this is too sacred for that. This is my bond with my wife is more important than whatever art you want to say, cinema is. And that's amazing. It is. More Catholics, should be that way, especially in Hollywood.
And he's lost roles for that.
He has. Yep, he has. And you know what? But if his marriage is strong, then roles come and go. Doesn't matter.
And I would say I commend all these actors that are like that, and in the entertainment industry by and large, because it's so antichrist in its nature that it's so difficult to maintain a part of that and also be a solid practicing Catholic. And so oftentimes we see sort of the opposite trend going on, where somebody will be brought up in a Catholic household, and then as time goes on and they get deeper and deeper into the entertainment industry, they just completely abandon their faith. And there's been Madonna is a big one. She actually had one of her music videos, I believe it was in the late 90s, condemned by the Vatican for the content of that. Lady Gaga is another one. I think it was Alejandro was that music video where she was like dressed as a nun provocatively and like swallowed a rosary on camera. And the excuses came out by the director like, oh, this is supposed to mean this spiritually. It has this significance.
It's just art. Don't take it seriously. Meanwhile, it's art. Take it seriously.
Right. And another example of some of this in the entertainment industry, there's a singer by the name of Sabrina Carpenter. I never heard of her up until recently when I read this news, but she did a music video recently, and she actually filmed segments of that music video in a parish in the Brooklyn diocese. And this music video was talking about like, oh, how all these guys are coming after me, and they all end up like dying or something. And literally in the cathedral, it shows like their caskets standing up, and she's like provocatively like dancing and celebrating in their deaths because they're just a bunch of guys wanting to get a woman. And apparently the parish didn't follow the proper protocol to get those segments of the music video shot in the film. So the bishop of the diocese, Bishop Robert Brennan, actually came out and said that he was absolutely appalled by that. They'd be launching a whole investigation into that because they have strict protocols that they follow for that. But it just goes to show you how in that industry they really don't care how the sacrilege. All of that is just complete fair game because it's all about getting the view count up.
Well, I mean, Hollywood, especially more recently, it's become blatantly obvious. Hollywood, the music industry, it's satanic. There's a whole like under society there of like fixers. These Hollywood people, they have parties. It's not like coming together at your house and potluck type of stuff. It's really crazy stuff, and the actors don't talk about it. People who are invited, the regular people who are invited, they have to sign NDAs. They can't talk about it, and if they do, they get sued and they don't get invited to these parties. There are orgies, there are satanic stuff, there are all sorts of pedophilia, big time, all sorts of crazy stuff, and there's a whole like industry of fixers, of guys who go around and, you were abused by this person, you want to sue? Let's throw some money at it. Let's shut you up. So that none of this, penetrates and tarnishes the silver screen, And so it's wonderful to see people emerge from that. And say this is not good, but like the industry it's all become just pretty much outright satanic.
Absolutely, that's why it's so difficult for practicing Catholics to really survive and do well there. So, for instance, we'd be remiss not to mention Jim Caviezel. He is probably one of the most outspoken Catholic actors out there, and I would recommend people. There's a recent interview he did with a podcaster named Sean Ryan, and it's probably my favorite interview with Jim because it's the most explicitly Catholic. Sean Ryan is a former Navy SEAL. He's now a podcaster, and he's also a recent convert to Catholicism. So they spent the entire time essentially talking about the faith. But of course, Caviezel is best known for his role in The Passion, incredible film, wonderful meditation, especially for Lent, on the agonies of Christ, the suffering of Christ. But then, of course, more recently in Sound of Freedom, he did a terrific job on that as well. But this is a man who's very explicit about his Catholic faith. He gives talks about it, and especially it's very interesting to hear about the experiences he had on the set of The Passion of the Christ. I mean, he went through a lot. He was struck by lightning. He had his shoulder, I think, dislocated. He was, when they were whipping him, one of those cat o' nine tails with like the iron prongs actually ripped into his flesh for real, and they kept the scene in there. And then he actually had to undergo a heart surgery afterwards. So it was just like on the brink of death, but he was willing to do that because he knew this was going to be like an incredibly powerful film. But yeah, he's very much a witness to just a very faithful person. He's lost a lot of roles. He was completely blackballed after Passion of the Christ. So Sound of Freedom, really, after years of just not really doing very many movies, Sound of Freedom has been like the biggest one he's done since that time.
I think you're mentioning him in Passion of Christ. I think it's interesting because now it's 20-some years later. People say Jim Caviezel, you're like, oh yeah, the guy who played Jesus in The Passion. How awesome is it? Like, people get typecasted for all sorts of things. Who's that? Robert Downey Jr. Oh, he was Iron Man, and forget everything else he ever did. But to be identified, with,
cool.
Oh, you played Jesus in a movie like 28 years ago or something like that. That's good. That's it's a compliment for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's really, I would say that's the next big step for these people that are involved in the industry, that do accept, the truths of the Catholic faith. You have somewhat of an obligation, if you feel called, turn it around. Start putting out movies and solid films that Catholics can go and see, and that's not completely contrary to the faith and scandalous, because the industry just has been so rot. Like we were talking about, all the degeneracy that goes on behind the scenes, that has an effect, and it bleeds over into the content that you actually produce. Even if they try to hide the scandalous parts of things from the public, it bleeds over into the product that you actually produce. And back in the day, the Catholic Church had a way of sort of at least monitoring that, or at least for faithful Catholics out there, the Catholic Legion of Decency was a group that was founded specifically for the purposes of rating different movies that would come out. I believe it was founded in like the mid-30s. Okay. They would rate movies that would come out, and they would also issue a list of condemned films. Like, look, based off of Catholic teaching, all this, you can't be watching these films. Yeah. We don't have anything like that now. Anybody's just free to make their own determinations as to what they can watch and what they take their kids to. And
honestly, I don't know if I would trust that, because who's making the determination? Is it Father Martin judging movies, or is it Father Chad Ripperger doing it? It depends.
I'd probably give Brokeback Mountain. Sorry, Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah.
a pass, a big thumbs up.
Yeah, right.
But, another Catholic actor who's been blackballed is Matthew Marsden. But he isn't blackballed necessarily because of his faith, but because he refused the COVID shot. But on principles of his faith, sure. So, on his conscience. And so during this time, he was losing all sorts of contracts. He was actually told in one film that he was starring in, they made it mandatory. This is during the height of the pandemic, and so they made it mandatory, the shot for every single person. He said, I can't take this for reasons of conscience. And they just said, okay, you're off. And he just couldn't get a job for a long time. And he's been on Fox News a bunch of times, I think Tucker, talking about it. Fortunately, he is getting jobs now, but this is a Catholic actor who has stuck to his guns and to his conscience and refused to cave,
Yeah, it's that, and that's the thing. I guess if you've been living a life outside of the church and then you come into the church, especially if you have a high profile, job like being in Hollywood, there's going to be sacrifice involved. There has to be, because especially working in an industry that's satanic, you have to. If you're seeking the truth, then you're in a position then to call out things that are evil and that have been perverting people. And that's a hard thing. I mean, to a degree, we all have to do that. I mean, it's not just them because they're actors. The tendency, you're an actor, you're in front of a camera, you must be like an amazing special, you're a super person. It's like, no, you're just a person in front of the camera,
Right. And that's why, it sometimes takes them hitting those low points when they're not getting contracts and they're getting rejected from deals to finally come to the realization that, okay, I need to change something here. Yeah. And again, that's across the entertainment industry by and large. I'll bring up Kobe Bryant, one of my favorite NBA players. It was after the rape accusations that were made against him. Eventually, the charges were lifted on that, but he was at such a low point. His wife had filed divorce papers. Vanessa Bryant had filed divorce papers against him, and he was raised Catholic, but he never really took it all that seriously. And it was after that whole event in Colorado that he realized, okay, I need to talk with the priest. I need to get my life straight here because clearly things are not right. And to his credit, he said, no, I'm not going to divorce my wife. I've made this commitment. I want to raise my family. I want to raise my daughters. And I want to embrace my faith as it should be embraced. Yeah. But it took reaching that rock bottom point for him to finally realize that.
I think is that what Bishop Sheen referred to as black grace, where he allows us to enter this dark, where everything is taken away. Yeah. We're so blinded by the world, by our own pride, by everything. God has to strip everything away so that we're only looking up. You can only see God, and you're like, oh.
Yeah. And it's very painful at the time that it happens for anyone that has gone through it. Some people also call it a severe mercy, and that's what it is. It truly is, even though you don't feel it at the time because it's so painful and confusing and difficult. But it really is. When you get out of that and kind of look back, you see, wow, that was a time of tremendous grace because I was on the wrong path. I was too attached to certain things here, and God took me out of that. He had to yank me out of that, but yeah, it's a tremendous grace when that happens, and that does happen with a number of individuals, and and if it doesn't happen, I mean, I think it would be so difficult if you are a famous actor in Hollywood. I would just think it would be so incredibly difficult to be saved, just because just the complete degradation of that lifestyle, all the parties that you're talking about, and the fame and all the things you have to do to compromise yourself.
And everybody's just catering to your ego because they want something from you. They're like, oh, you're good at this, so they're going to feed that ego so that you can get on their projects, and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this because I'm good and I want money, and and all of this, and it's the monster feeds itself, from every direction, and to get out of that must be tremendous.
There's a good interview, a mic'd up that we did with Nicole Abisinio. It's called "Devil in Hollywood." It's been blackballed by YouTube, taken off by YouTube. Because we talk about pedophilia. And she's a former actress who was in Hollywood from a younger age. And she just said, they wanted us to take her clothes off at age 14. She said, that's pedophilia. You can't do that. Yeah. And she said that she was getting all sorts of roles. She was with big name actors, all that kind of stuff. But then as soon as she converted to the Catholic faith, as soon as she converted, she didn't even necessarily tell people, but she said she just started losing roles. She wasn't getting the phone calls, and she said it was just so strange.
The devil's
almost
stepping
like
back a little bit.
Yes, no, she said that's what it was.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
She actually had this very strange encounter with a woman on the street after she converted, who called herself a witch and said, you know, we found out about your whatever conversion, and you know, we're praying against you, essentially.
Wow.
So yeah, it's dark stuff.
There's a website, I haven't been to it in a while. I think it's called Vigilant Citizen, and it's a person who was in, I think, the music industry, but he exposes the straight up satanic stuff in modeling, in music, in Hollywood. These actors go on to these shoots, and they're put into weird, like, the imagery is very satanic. There's a thing where they do this a lot. And this is supposed to be 666. Like, imagine this is a 6, that one, and that one. You see that. You see them doing this a lot of one-eyed cover stuff. It's like, what's so artistic about a person going like this with their eye covered? But there's occult symbolism with that. And that's the whole point, is thrusting this stuff that they're, like, we have, you know, Catholic imagery, you know, with Western civilization and everything. Well, they have their own demonic, diabolic imagery that they have been thrusting into entertainment. And we've been seeing it and not even knowing we see it. They'll see it. I saw a video recently where they were talking about, in an episode of MASH, something about like the files. They're having a scene. The doctors are there. There's a file cabinet there, and in the file cabinet's the files A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then there's like F, 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 which is 666, I think. Is F the sixth letter of the alphabet? Yeah. So some people are like, well, that's 666. Well, why put 3 Fs and not 3 Gs or 3 Hs or whatever? You know, you could go back and forth on that. But that sort of thing has been in our entertainment for years and years and years. And now it's just they don't have to hide it anymore. They can be totally open about it, and people are like, oh, it's just another thing.
Well, I mean, Satan is the prince of this world. So he does have the power to grant people who want it. And I've spoken with reputable exorcists who say that it is true that some celebrities and some politicians will literally sell their soul to Satan in exchange for fame. And they get the fame, but you've sold your soul to Satan, and it's extremely difficult to get out of that. So, yeah. All right. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus, exules Filii Hevae. Ad te suspiramus, gementes afflentes, in hac lacrimanum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son,
the Holy Ghost.
Amen. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.